one I love be coming back to me.
Welcome to Always Remember World War II Through Veterans' Eyes. This is the 8th episode, Bloody Red, Blood-Soaked Omaha Beach Remembered. Bloody Omaha Beach bore the brunt of D-Day's savage fighting, with more casualties than all the other D-Day beaches combined. Aware that the men he led in one of the first waves to land on Bloody Omaha Beach had no prior combat experience, Staff Sergeant Walter Ehlers single-handedly took out several German machine gun nests, even while he was in their crossfire. Ehlers was at first elated when he was told he would be receiving the Medal of Honor for his actions, but he was soon brought to his knees upon learning the terrible loss that he had suffered on Omaha Beach. Trying to sleep after having witnessed so much death and suffering on Omaha Beach, Charles Toole's buddy told him that 24 hours from now there'd be a lot more dead in their own company. Toole's buddy's words proved eerily prophetic. Thanks to 2 Texas Rangers, there were far less dead on Omaha Beach than there would have been otherwise. Leonard Lomell and his buddy Jack Kuhn climbed the 100-foot cliffs of Pointe du Hoc, even as Nazi soldiers fired down upon them, threw grenades, and cut their ropes. Lomell and Kuhn knew that the lives of countless Americans depended on them finding the huge 155mm coastal howitzers the Nazis had hidden above, capable of firing 5 miles or more out to sea, far enough to hit the troop ships landing for the invasion. Nothing in their 18 years of life could have prepared Frank Caruk and Mark Wilson for all the suffering they witnessed landing in the initial waves at Omaha Beach. All of their stories will be told in Episode 8, Bloody Red, Blood-Soaked Omaha Beach Remembered. During the 1990s, while serving as a teacher with the Department of Defense schools in Bad Kreuznach, Germany, my family and I visited many of the sites associated with World War II, from the beaches of Normandy where the D-Day landings took place, to the Ardennes forest where the Battle of the Bulge was fought, to the death camps of Auschwitz, Buchenwald, and Dachau. We saw what was at stake in World War II, when not only democracy in the U.S., but throughout the world hung in the balance. I began to write to World War II veterans to thank them for their service. I sent them pictures of the sites we visited, and I invited them to share their stories with me, and I promised to keep them alive in the classes that I taught. What I never could have anticipated was that veterans shared their stories with their buddies and printed my letters in their reunion newsletters. I was soon corresponding with approximately 140 World War II veterans, 20 of whom received the nation's highest honor, the Medal of Honor. I had more material than I could ever use in the classes that I taught. To keep my promise, I wrote Always Remember World War II Through Veterans' Eyes and launched this series of podcasts, which are based upon the book. With 156,000 soldiers, 6,939 ships, and 11,590 aircraft, the Allies had assembled the greatest invasion force in history for D-Day. The Allies needed all the soldiers they could muster. Everyone knew it was going to be bloody. The Allied command knew that the outcome of Operation Overlord, the code name for the D-Day invasion, was no foregone conclusion. Although the Allies benefited from air superiority, no such superiority existed for the ground forces. As Supreme Commander, General Eisenhower bore full responsibility for the success or failure of the D-Day invasion. In his pocket on D-Day, General Eisenhower carried 2 messages, one to be read if the invasion was successful and the Allies were able to secure the beachheads from which reinforcements and supplies could be built up. The other, a somber note to be read if the invasion was a failure. The stakes on D-Day could not have been higher. Had the invasion been unsuccessful, the Allies could not have amassed another invasion force as great as it had assembled on D-Day. The dark cloud of Nazism that enveloped Europe would have spread unchecked throughout the world. Uncle Sam provided nearly half of the soldiers who landed on D-Day, with the majority of the rest coming from the United Kingdom and Canada. Their target, a 60-mile stretch of the Normandy coast, whose beaches were given 5 nicknames by the Allied command: Omaha, Utah, Sword, Juno, and Gold. Bloody Omaha Beach saw more casualties than the other 4 D-Day beaches combined. The Americans suffered approximately 3,686 casualties. The Germans had an estimated 1,200 casualties. Reporting for Collier's magazine, Ernest Hemingway observed the Omaha landing unfold from an LCVP, which was a small military vessel for transfers from ship to shore during amphibious landings. Frustrated, Hemingway watched helplessly as the young Americans were slaughtered in wave after wave. The first, second, third, fourth, and fifth waves lay where they had fallen, looking like so many heavily laden bundles on the flat, pebbly stretch between the sea and the first cover. Arriving on D-Day +1, war correspondent Ernie Pyle considered it a pure miracle that we ever took the beach at all. He wrote for the Scripps Howard Wire Service that the odds the American soldiers faced getting ashore was like my whipping Joe Louis down to a pulp. Before they even got to shore, the landing craft that delivered the soldiers had to negotiate a deadly maze of mines, some of which were floating, and avoid colliding into underwater obstacles, such as 6-pronged iron spiders and buried logs sticking outward just above the surface. If the men's landing craft survived that maze, Pyle described even more ominous German fortifications that awaited them on the beach. The advantages were all theirs, the disadvantages all ours. 100-foot bluff, a couple of 100 yards back from the beach, had great concrete gun emplacements built right into the hilltop. They could shoot parallel with the beach and cover every foot of it for miles with artillery fire. They had hidden machine gun nests on the forward slopes, with crossfire taking in every inch of the beach. These nests were connected by networks of trenches, so that the German gunners could move without exposing themselves. Throughout the length of the beach, running zigzag, a couple of 100 yards back from the shoreline, was an immense V-shaped ditch, 15 feet deep. Nothing could cross it, not even men on foot, until fills had been made. And in other places, they had great concrete walls. Our only exits from the beach were several swales or valleys, each about 100 yards wide. The Germans made the most of these funnel-like traps, sowing them with buried mines. They contained also barbed wire entanglements with mines attached, hidden ditches, and machine guns firing from the slopes. No wonder that a worried General Omar Bradley, fearing that our forces had suffered an irreversible catastrophe, seriously considered abandoning the invasion and evacuating its survivors before the Americans finally got a foothold on the beach and began moving inland. Prior to the invasion, Walter D. Ehlers of Buena Park, California, was called into his company commander's office, along with his brother Rowland. The two brothers had enlisted together in the Army in 1940 and served together in the 7th Infantry Division, the 3rd Infantry Division, and the 1st Infantry Division. They had landed together in French Morocco, North Africa, and had served as honor guards at the Casablanca Conference, earning a compliment from President Roosevelt himself, who attended the meeting along with Prime Minister Winston Churchill. President Roosevelt noted that we were mighty fine-looking soldiers, and that we would make good replacements for the 1st Infantry Division, who had lost so many casualties at Caserny Pass. Soon after Rowland and Walter Ehlers were reassigned to the 1st Division, where they made the D-Day landing in Gila, Sicily, Rowland was wounded in the invasion, but later rejoined Walter in England as they trained for the Normandy invasion. It was there that the two brothers were called into the company commander's office. He had 3 things to discuss with us. 1, he said we only had $5,000 insurance each, and that he thought we should increase it to the maximum of $10,000 because he expected heavy casualties on our next contact with the enemy. 2, he informed us about the Sullivan Brothers incident in the Pacific, where all 5 brothers lost their lives at sea. That it was now military policy to separate brothers and military units that were exposed to a heavy loss of life. 3, that he was transferring me to Company L, 18th Infantry Regiment. The two brothers waved goodbye to each other at the port of embarkation in Weymouth, England, as they left in separate units for the same destination, Bloody Omaha Beach. Ehlers had been named Staff Sergeant of the 3rd Platoon, 3rd Squad, Company L, 18th Infantry Regiment. Ehlers was the only soldier who had seen any previous combat. He had known that the men of his platoon for only a few short months, and he didn't feel he knew them very well because their training had been so intense. "One of my requirements was to learn the names of the 12 men in my squad and to know their shoes, socks, and other clothing sizes. So if they needed some emergency replacements, all I had to do was to send the information to the supply sergeant, and they would see that we got what was needed." Ehlers' platoon left England on the night of June 5th in an LCI ship headed for Omaha Beach. "We were supposed to be the 2nd wave. However, our commander received the message that the 1st wave was pinned down and that they needed more men on the beach immediately. When the 1st wave assault boats returned, they came to our ship for the men to be sent to the beach immediately. My squad and I were chosen for this event. We went down the rope ladders into the assault boats, and we immediately proceeded to the beach landing area, which in our case was Omaha Beach. We were not prepared to witness the chaos and the horror, the death, the injuries, and the wreckage that lay before us on the beach. We came in sometime shortly after 9 a.m., ahead of the 2nd wave. I called our landing the intermittent wave. Our boat hit a sandbar. It was as far as we could go. The ramp went down. We ran off the ramp into the water about 6 feet deep. A couple of the men in my squad found it over their heads. We had to pull them to where they could get their feet on the sand and their heads out of the water. As soon as we got on the beach, the men wanted to lay down. I told them that we had to get off this beach or we would be killed. I got them to follow me up to cross the beach, a path suggested by the beach master. It was made by the 1st wave as they attempted to cross the beach. There are mines from the beach to the bottom of the hill. The men had stepped on the mines. Many of the men were killed and wounded. As we went up to the trail, we passed many of the dead and wounded. As we came near the bottom of the hill, there was a roll of wire that had not been blown. We found 2 Bangalore torpedo men in a defilated area. They informed us that they were pinned down. I informed them that we needed the wire blown, that we would fire up at the trenches to keep the Germans down while they would blow up the wire. They indeed were pinned down, because as soon as they moved to put the torpedo under the wire, they were fired on, one of them getting killed. The other was able to blow the wire. As soon as the wire was breached, I rushed up the hill with my men, following, and we got into the trenches. We captured the gun emplacement and 4 German soldiers. A few short days later, Ehlers was once again led ahead of his patrol as they attacked German defenses near Gonville, France. Ehlers personally killed 4 German soldiers when they attacked his patrol. With a machine gun trained upon his squad, Ehlers sprang upon its German crew, killing them. Ehlers' men were still in the crossfire of mortar section and machine gun fire. According to his Congressional Medal of Honor citation, Ehlers then led his men through this hail of bullets to kill or put to flight the enemy of the mortar section, killing 3 men himself. Ehlers then crawled to the machine gun nest, and his squad covered him. When he reached the machine gun nest, Ehlers leaped to his feet, and he fired on the enemy, eliminating the threat single-handedly. In his 2000 letter, Ehlers explained why he didn't bring more members of his squad with him during his attack on the machine gun nests. "First, because my men had no previous combat experience, and second, because I always led my men in combat. I was the first to come in contact with the enemy patrol, which I knocked out myself. I then had my men fix their bayonets on their rifles, and they had to follow me. I came upon a machine gun nest. I knocked it out before my men caught up with me. I could not wait to have someone to help me when I could do it myself, and I am sure that if I had hesitated in doing what I did, the enemy could have had time to get into a position to cause more casualties." The next day, after having advanced deep into enemy territory, Ehlers' platoon was ordered to withdraw after it came upon intensive enemy fire. According to his citation, Ehlers made the withdrawal possible. Staff Sergeant Ehlers, after his squad had covered the withdrawal of the remainder of the platoon, stood up and by continuous fire at the semicircle of enemy placements, diverted the bulk of the hostile enemy fire on himself, thus permitting the members of his own squad to withdraw. At this point, though wounded himself, he carried his wounded automatic rifleman to safety. The wounded rifleman survived, as did Ehlers, who had been hit on the right side of his back, my rib deflecting the bullet into my combat pack, and the bullet then hitting a bar of soap in my pack, making the bullet go through my trenching shovel, Ehlers wrote. When I told my company commander that I was wounded in the back, he turned me around. When he saw the hole in my trench shovel, he said, My God, you have been shot clear through. You should be dead. I said, Oh no, sir. The bullet hit me in the side. Walter Ehlers was elated to be recommended for the Medal of Honor, one of only 12 men who participated in the D-Day Normandy invasion to receive the nation's highest military honor, and one of only 3 who lived through the invasion to receive the medal. The other 9 received it posthumously. However, his elation was tempered by his brother Roland's death. Roland was one of the thousands of Americans who died on Omaha Beach, his landing craft struck by an artillery shell as it went ashore. When his brother's company commander gave Ehlers the news, Ehlers went to pieces for the first and only time during the war. Walter Ehlers may have been a Congressional Medal of Honor recipient, but the bravest man he ever met was his brother Roland, who was his hero. Not a day goes by that I don't think about him, Ehlers wrote. In addition to the Medal of Honor, Ehlers received several other awards while in the service, including a Silver Star, a Bronze Star, and Purple Hearts for the injuries suffered. After the war, Ehlers worked as a benefits counselor for the Veterans Administration, but for the first 16 years on the job, he didn't tell co-workers that he had been awarded the Medal of Honor. They only found out when the White House called him at work with an invitation to an event that then President Lyndon Johnson was hosting. Ehlers died at the age of 92 on February 20th, 2014, at the Veterans Administration Hospital in Long Beach, California, of kidney failure. Charles E. Toole of Deerfield, Illinois, was in the third wave that landed on Omaha Beach around 2 p.m. on the afternoon of D-Day. Toole recalled that most of the 200 soldiers on his Landing Craft Infantry, or LCI, were seasick after crossing in choppy water from Plymouth Harbor. Being seasick and loaded down with heavy ammunition and gear made it nearly impossible to wade through the waist-deep water with any speed. But Toole realized his 16th Infantry Regiment had a pretty easy landing compared to the first wave at Omaha. He recalled, We were subjected to sniper fire and artillery and mortar, but nothing in the machine gun firing that caused so many casualties earlier in the day. The beach was filled with the carnage left with the previous waves. It was quite a sobering experience for an 18-year-old, which I was, to see so many dead still sloshing around in the water like so many logs, coming in and going out with the tide. Tanks and trucks and small naval craft were burning on the beach and in the water very close to the beach. Much confusion. A lot of the boats carried barrage balloons, which were filled with helium and attached to the end of a steel cable. The balloons thwarted the Germans' firing accuracy, preventing them from getting too close when they came down to strafe the truce ships. Toole was particularly puzzled by the tremendous number of dead rabbits killed by the naval bombardment and Air Force. The dead rabbits seemed to be everywhere. A Frenchman later explained to Toole that the rabbits had proliferated during the German occupation, since the French were not allowed any firearms with which to shoot them. Toole's infantry regiment had been told to take out a machine gun position about 1,000 yards inland, but like most other soldiers, Toole didn't come close to securing his objective on D-Day. He estimated because of the intense fighting, his regiment only got a couple hundred yards inland on June 6. Toole was still on the beach come nightfall. As he tried to sleep, Toole confessed to his buddy, Seats, an Ohio farm boy, that his morale had sunk pretty low when they landed and saw all the dead and wounded on the beach. He made what sounded like a classic remark, that war was not all glory, that by this time tomorrow there were going to be a lot more dead right there in our own company. Well, sure enough, 24 hours later, he was shot and killed instantly, right by my side, as we were just starting to move inland. Toole and Seats had been on the left flank, moving through an apple orchard when they came across an old farmhouse with German pallets neatly tucked underneath its shed. We knew Germans were close by, Toole recalled. Suddenly Toole and his friend were lit up by tracer bullets. Tracers, generally yellow, purple, or orange, were used to indicate a target. We both started to run up to a hedgerow, Toole recalled. Before they could reach it, Seats was hit right in the chest, literally spun him around, blood coming out of his mouth. The sad prediction that Seats had made the night before, that a lot of us now are going to be dead by this time tomorrow, had come true. Seats was the first man Toole knew who was killed in his company. Toole came to shore carrying a special 15 to 20-pound charge shaped like a beehive. The charge was designed with special prongs to attach to the top of a pillbox to destroy it. Another soldier was assigned to carry the detonator wire. Toole faithfully carried the charge around for 4 to 5 days, but after being shot at and watching several of his buddies get hit, Toole decided the beehive charge was simply too dangerous to carry around any longer. He left it in a foxhole, and he buried it in some dirt. I often wonder how many years later some poor French farmer came along and possibly detonated it, Toole commented. By June 12th, Toole's 1st Division had penetrated farther into Normandy than any other unit. They took the French town of Caumont, but as they did so, Toole lost his best friend, a married man named Moore from Chattanooga, Tennessee. He was a deeply religious man, and just a day or two earlier, we were talking about all sorts of things when he remarked that he just felt that he was going to come through this fight safe and sound. He then reminded me of a hymn that we both knew, God'll take care of you, so I just told him to keep thinking that way. As they approached Caumont, the infantry was told to fix their bayonets because the Germans were putting up resistance. The infantry kept their bayonets in a scabbard which was attached to their packs. Each scabbard had a release which allowed for the bayonet to be pulled out. Toole was having difficulty getting his bayonet released from the scabbard. He asked Moore, who happened to be right by his side, to get it out for him. After struggling with it for a moment, Moore replied that he couldn't get it out either. Just then a mortar or something came in. He got blown open in the guts, Toole recalled. Toole's buddy died as he stood right by his side on the 12th of June, having only moments ago assisted Toole with his bayonet. After the war, Toole was determined to visit Moore's family in Chattanooga. He took a train to Chattanooga so he could meet with Moore's family and tell them what had happened. But when the train stopped, Toole didn't get out. He found he just couldn't do it. The pain was too great. 35 years later, Toole tried again at this time, and this time did find what was left of his buddy's family, reaching out to his friend's aunt. Moore's wife had remarried and moved away to Florida. Soon after his buddy's death, Toole himself was hit in the leg with a piece of shrapnel from a German mortar. In an interview with the author, Toole recalled getting hit. You know it's a mortar because you hear the thump when it leaves the tube several hundred yards away. Then you don't hear anything until all of a sudden there's a whoosh and she's on you. That's why I knew it was a mortar that hit me. Toole was sent back to a British hospital to recover, eventually returning to France. By this time, Toole's company had pushed deeper into Normandy. In time, his company would participate in the Battle of the Bulge. Toole reluctantly missed the fighting at the Bulge, having come down with a bad case of trench foot just before the fighting in Aachen. The trench foot resulted in another hospitalization, which lasted this time for a couple of months, followed by an assignment to a desk job. I felt a bit like a fellow who had deserted his ship because of the bulge fighting was going on at this time, and I would have been in the thick of it had I been there, Toole recalled. Fiercely loyal to his brothers in arms, he reflected, even today I still wonder about particular individuals and wonder who made it and who didn't. Toole decided to stay in the Army, and he would eventually go on to fight in Korea before retiring from the service in 1967. Frank Caruk of Palatine, Illinois, was just 19 years old when he landed in the third wave at Omaha between 8:30 a.m. and 9:30 a.m. on D-Day. Caruk recalled, "The sight of dead soldiers and parts of bodies was disturbing to me. I kept on praying, and I kept on moving, bearing to the right as I did so." Once ashore, Caruk found a sort of path. "I kept walking, and I bumped into other GIs who got separated from their units, and we banded together to do what we could do." Caruk didn't reach his objective until the next day. A machine gunner, Caruk found it difficult to carry and set up the heavy 50 caliber gun, especially under combat conditions. Because of their weapon's deadly effectiveness, machine gunners were a prime target in combat. You had to move a lot after firing to get yourself in a more protected position, Caruk recalled. Machine gunners had amongst the highest casualty rates in World War II. Caruk himself only ran into 2 others who lasted as long as he did in the war. Despite that, he never complained about his assignment, nor did he recall hearing anyone else complain. "You got the assignment and you just did it. You did as good a job as you could do." Caruk spent the night of D-Day on a bluff overlooking the beach, not reaching his objective until the following day. Mark D. Wilson of Clarksburg, West Virginia, served as a 2nd Lieutenant Platoon Forward Observer in B Company of the 2nd Platoon of the 81st Chemical Mortar Battalion. His mission on D-Day was to go with the landing elements of the infantry in attack and direct mortar fire on targets requested by the infantry commander. The mortars had a range of 6,000 yards, but they were generally fired at closer ranges. They included both high explosive and white phosphorus shells. The high explosive shells were used to maximize enemy casualties, while the phosphorus shells provided fire and smoke screens. On D-Day, B Company began climbing down ladders from their troop ships onto the landing crafts at 4:30 a.m., while some 15 miles from shore. Wilson was in the 5th wave to land on Omaha Beach. "The channel was running high and rough. The LCVPs bobbed up and down in the choppy water. We had to time our jump from the ladder carefully to land at the high point of the LCVP. Otherwise, we might fall into the sea or get crushed between the LCVP and the troop ship." The GIs bore a heavy load, carrying battle gear and equipment, impregnated clothing for protection against possible chemical attack, gas masks, and emergency flotation devices. It was high tide when Wilson's company came ashore, and the Americans only held a narrow shelf of gravel, which was under heavy enemy fire from the Germans, who still held the high ground on the bluff. Wilson recalled the intense fighting on Omaha Beach. "They were inflicting heavy casualties. The dead and the wounded were lying everywhere along the beach and in the water. Damaged landing craft, equipment, and tanks were strewn about in the surf. One of the first dead I saw was a 29th Division man that bunked across from me in our hammocks on the troop ship. He was lying face up, his eyes wide open, staring into the sky. The pallor of death, which I got to know very well, colored his face. Another dead man was lying face down. He had been hit in the lower abdomen, probably by a 20-millimeter shell. Pieces of his intestine and his uniform had been blown back and had wrapped the lower part of his body tightly. As the day wore on, the carnage continued. The fact that we had not landed where we were supposed to be added to our confusion. Supporting naval fire began knocking out German fortified positions on the bluff. Gradually, the infantry fought up to the top of the bluff, which was heavily mined. Slowly we moved off the gravel shelf and through a shallow ravine at the bottom of the bluff. The combat engineers were clearing paths of mines up to the bluff. This required caution and persistence. By nightfall, we had moved along the cleared paths little more than halfway up to the bluff. One of our men, needing to relieve himself, stepped to the side of the path and he stepped on a mine. He was evacuated to the beach and he was transferred to a ship offshore. We later learned the ship was bombed and strafed and he was killed there. As bad as it was, the carnage of Omaha Beach would have been much worse had it not been for the courageous actions of the 225-member 2nd Ranger Battalion under the command of Lieutenant Colonel James Earl Rudder, who had what General Omar Bradley considered the most dangerous mission of D-Day. The Rangers were charged with landing at Pointe du Hoc, quickly scrambling up its heavily defended 100-foot cliffs and finding and destroying the enormous 155-millimeter coastal guns the enemy had hidden there, trained on the beaches below. If they survived all that, then the Rangers had to cut off the east-west road between Omaha and Utah beaches about a mile inland to prevent German reinforcements from reaching the beaches. By the end of their mission on D-Day, the Rangers had suffered 70% casualties. The Rangers climbed up the 100-foot cliffs of Pointe du Hoc, even as the 175 Germans who defended the cliffs fired down at them, threw grenades, and cut their ropes. First Sergeant Leonard G. Lomell of Toms River, New Jersey, recalled the radio man Bob Fruehling climbed the cliff with a 300 radio set strapped to his back. The heavy radio sets, with their long aerial antennas protruding out, made the radio men easy targets for the Germans. Climbing as quickly as he could with a 50-pound radio set, Fruehling began to run out of steam about 5 feet from the top of the cliff. Exhausted, Fruehling called out to Lomell, "Help me! Help me! I'm running out of strength! I'm going to fall!" In an interview marking the 50th anniversary of D-Day, Lomell recalled the radio man's desperate plight. "At this point in time, they were shooting at us, trying to cut our ropes and trying to make us fall. One of my other men, Len Rubin, he was built like a gorilla, a very powerful man, happened to be just a few feet away. He heard Fruehling's pleas, and he grabbed Bob by the back of the neck, and he is such a strong and powerful man, he sort of flung him, or threw him, over the top of the cliff edge. Bob went rolling with the radio aerial whipping about. Fortunately, Bob did not fall. Len Rubin saved his life." Although already injured, Lomell had been named acting platoon leader for the mission. He led his 12-man patrol through heavy automatic weapons fire, destroying an enemy machine gun nest, then setting up a roadblock on the coastal road leading to Omaha Beach, before finding the big guns, which were the number one objective of the mission. Despite having been the target of Air Force bombing for several weeks, there wasn't a shell crater within 3 miles of the big howitzers. The Air Force had never found them. The French resistance had also not succeeded in getting a message to the Allies so that the Navy's big guns could have targeted the howitzers. With a range of 5 miles and plenty of ammunition, the Germans could have used the 5 155-millimeter big guns to murder thousands of Allied soldiers, landing both on Omaha and Utah beaches, as well as hitting those still on ships at sea. In an August 15, 1993 letter, Lomell recalled how he and Kuhn put the big guns out of commission. "I'll never forget my first sight of the 5 big guns of Pointe du Hoc. I was on a 2-man patrol with my platoon sergeant, Jack Kuhn. It was about 8:15 a.m. D-Day morning. We were nervous as hell. We had infiltrated German lines twice already to get to where we were, which was about 200 yards south of the blacktop coastal road opposite from the point. I looked over a high hedgerow, and there were the guns in a sort of veil, swale, draw, or whatever you want to call it, in an apple orchard, completely camouflaged with netting and apple trees. A German, heavily armed combat patrol had just passed us, not 200 feet away, not 20 feet away. There were about 40 Germans in the patrol. The big howitzers were like nothing Lomell had ever seen before. They seemed huge to me. High wheels, large, long tube or barrel pointing skyward, too high to reach. They looked like they had been in position for quite a long time. Lomell and Kuhn couldn't believe their good fortune. There wasn't a German in the gun position. Instead, the Germans had assembled in a field about 100 yards away, 75 of them, their backs turned to the howitzers as they listened to their officers. Having seen other Germans in the area, we decided to take advantage of the opportunity as quickly as possible. Jack concealed himself on the top of the high bushy hedgerow to cover me, while I went in with our 2 thermite grenades. The 2 thermite grenades had been given to Lomell and Kuhn specifically for the destruction of the guns. They were a silent but effective weapon. They make no noise, and they're capable of very intense heat that melts metal such as gears, hinges, moving parts, etc. The 2 men went to work as quickly as they could, using the thermite grenades to complete their crucial mission, as Lomell disabled 2 of the guns and damaged their gun sights with my submachine gun butt. We both ran like scared rabbits as fast as we could behind the high hedgerows on the sunken road about 200 yards. We then gathered up several more thermite grenades. Each man carried one, and we rushed back to the high hedgerow, hiding the guns. We peered over to see if any Germans had returned to the gun position, and finding they hadn't, Sergeant Kuhn resumed his guard position, and I re-entered the gun position, and we finished destroying the remaining 3 guns as I had the first 2. In just 15 to 20 minutes, Lomell and Kuhn had managed to destroy all 5 guns, rendering them inoperable and saving countless lives. As the 2 men climbed out of the gun position over the high hedgerows, they heard a tremendous blast, which they attributed to the U.S. battleship Texas. Ramrods, stones, dirt, and dust showered down on us. Though we had been knocked off our feet, we quickly got up, and we ran as fast as we could back to our Rangers' roadblock. Lomell and Kuhn ran so fast they never looked back to see if the Germans were following them or if they had returned to the now useless howitzers. Despite receiving both the Distinguished Service Cross and the Silver Star for their bravery, Lomell and Kuhn never considered themselves heroes, just good rangers. We just happened to be at the right place at the right time, Lomell explained. We then did what we were trained to do. We were just plain lucky. So were the thousands of Allied soldiers landing on the beaches of Utah and Omaha, whose lives were spared because the howitzers had been rendered inoperable. After the war, Lomell graduated from Rutgers University Law School. Putting his war days behind him, he married Charlotte Ewart. The devoted couple were married for 64 years and raised 3 daughters. Lomell built a successful law practice. A modest man, he never spoke of the war. Even his law partner Robert Fall did not know of the critical role Lomell played on D-Day until 1985, when television news anchor Tom Brokaw wrote The Greatest Generation and devoted 1 chapter to Leonard Lomell. Lomell died at the age of 91 on March 1st, 2011. The cost of D-Day had been immense. American casualties alone were estimated by the First Army at 6,603, 1,465 killed, 3,184 wounded, 1,928 missing, and 26 captured. 2,500 were considered airborne casualties. Bloody Omaha Beach had as many casualties as the other 4 beaches combined. At Omaha, airborne bombardments had done little to weaken the German defenses, causing it to become one of the deadliest days for American casualties in military history. General Bradley would later write, "Every man who set foot on Omaha Beach that day was a hero." Had the Allies not succeeded in securing a foothold on the Normandy beaches, they might very well have lost the war. The Allies could not have amassed another invasion force as great as what it assembled on D-Day. If the D-Day invasion had failed, the cloud of Nazism that enveloped Europe may never have been lifted and could have spread unchecked throughout the world.
I come on the waterfront.
Our song today, I Cover the Waterfront, was composed by Johnny Green with lyrics by Edward Heyman, and this version is sung by the incomparable Billie Holiday. It was a big hit during World War II. If you liked this podcast of Always Remember World War II Through Veterans' Eyes, please leave us a review on whatever podcast network that you listen. Follow our podcasts and tell your friends. New episodes come out bi-weekly. Check out our website for additional photographs of the veterans whose stories were told in this podcast and additional information. You can find the companion book that this podcast is based upon on Amazon.com. Until next time, thank you for remembering our World War II veterans.